The base's corridors echoed with the purposeful footsteps of personnel preparing for night operations. Ghost moved through these familiar spaces like a specter haunting his own past. Invisible to the mop bucket wheels squeaked against the polished concrete floor of SEAL Team 6's briefing room, a sound that had become as familiar as breathing to the hunched figure pushing it. Steam rose from the industrial-grade cleaning solution, carrying the sharp scent of ammonia that burned the nostrils of anyone unfortunate enough to be downwind. The SEALs barely glanced up from their tactical gear as the janitor methodically worked around their boots, invisible as furniture, unremarkable as wallpaper. "Watch the floor, Pops," Lieutenant Commander Bradley Razor Morrison called out without looking, his tone carrying the casual dismissal reserved for those deemed beneath notice. The other operators chuckled, their attention already returning to the satellite imagery spread across the conference table. None of them saw the janitor's weathered hands pause for just a fraction of a second on the mop handle, or noticed how his eyes, pale blue and sharp as winter ice, swept across their classified materials with the precision of a scanner. The man they called Pops had been cleaning these halls for 3 years, arriving before dawn and leaving after midnight, his presence so constant it had become background noise. His coveralls bore no name tag, just a faded security badge that read J. Vance in block letters. The operators knew nothing about him beyond his punctuality and his silence. They had no idea that those same hands now gripping a janitor's mop had once guided an F-22 Raptor through enemy airspace at Mach 2, or that the stooped shoulders beneath the maintenance uniform had worn the silver eagles of a full colonel. The briefing room's fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across faces painted with camouflage. Major General Patricia Iron Hawk Cross stood at the head of the table, her presence commanding absolute attention from everyone except the janitor, who continued his methodical cleaning pattern. She was briefing the team on Operation Nightfall, a classified mission that had already cost the lives of 2 reconnaissance teams. "Intelligence suggests the target facility is heavily fortified," General Cross announced, her voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. "Anti-aircraft systems, radar installations, and an estimated 40 hostile combatants. This is not a standard extraction." The janitor's mop moved in steady strokes across the floor, but his ears caught every word. His mind, despite 3 years of forced retirement and endless nights of bourbon-soaked sleep, still processed tactical information with the speed of a combat computer. The mission parameters were all wrong. The approach vector would expose the insertion team to concentrated fire. The extraction point was compromised before they even deployed. Outside, the Virginia morning sun painted the sky in shades of amber and gold, a stark contrast to the sterile environment of the classified briefing room. Soon, very soon, that same sky would become the stage for a demonstration that would shatter every assumption these elite warriors held about the invisible man with the mop. The mission briefing continued with surgical precision, each detail meticulously planned and rehearsed. General Cross's pointer traced routes across satellite imagery while her voice maintained its steady cadence. Insertion at 300 hours, radio silence until Phase 2 completion. The SEALs nodded with practiced confidence, their training evident in every response. They had executed hundreds of similar operations, their reputation built on a foundation of flawless execution and unshakable brotherhood. But today would be different. The janitor finished cleaning the far corner of the room and began pushing his cart toward the exit. As he passed behind the assembled team, his eyes lingered on the mission clock, 72 hours until deployment. His jaw tightened imperceptibly, the only outward sign of the storm brewing beneath his carefully maintained facade. 3 years of mopping floors and emptying trash cans had not dulled the tactical instincts that once made him legendary among the Air Force's elite. Every fiber of his being screamed warnings about the mission they were planning. Lieutenant Morrison glanced back as the janitor's cart squeaked past. "Hey, Pops," he called out, his voice dripping with condescension. "Make sure you hit the head on your way out. Smells like something died in there." The comment drew snickers from his teammates, men who measured worth in confirmed kills and classified missions. They saw nothing in the janitor worthy of respect, just another civilian contractor padding his retirement with menial labor. The man they dismissed so casually paused at the door, his hand resting on the cart's push handle. For a moment, something flickered across his features, a shadow of the warrior he had once been. His posture straightened by perhaps an inch, his shoulders squaring almost imperceptibly. Then the moment passed, and he was simply the janitor again, pushing his cart through doorways that led to forgotten corridors and empty offices. General Cross watched the exchange with growing irritation. She had built her career on reading people, on understanding the dynamics that made elite teams function. The casual cruelty she witnessed served no purpose except to stroke fragile egos. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying a warning edge, "we have work to do." The operators snapped back to attention, but not before exchanging glances that spoke of shared contempt for the maintenance staff. In the hallway beyond, footsteps echoed against polished linoleum. The janitor moved through the base with purposeful efficiency, his route taking him past command centers and communication hubs, his presence so familiar that security personnel barely acknowledged his existence. He had become part of the infrastructure, as essential and overlooked as the ventilation system that kept the air breathable. But unlike the machines that hummed in the walls, this janitor carried memories of combat missions that remained classified decades after their completion. His mind held secrets that would have changed the trajectory of the briefing he had just witnessed, if anyone had thought to ask. The storage closet on sublevel B served as his unofficial headquarters, a cramped space filled with industrial cleaning supplies and forgotten equipment. Behind boxes of floor wax and toilet paper, hidden beneath a loose floorboard that squeaked only when stepped on incorrectly, lay a waterproof case that hadn't been opened in 18 months. Inside that case, wrapped in oiled cloth and sealed against moisture, were items that told a different story about the man the SEALs called Pops. A distinguished flying cross, a silver star, mission patches from operations that officially never happened, and at the bottom, beneath commendations that spoke of valor in the face of impossible odds, a single photograph, a younger version of the janitor standing beside an F-22 Raptor, his flight suit bearing the call sign, Ghost, in bold letters across the chest. The woman in the photograph beside him wore the same confident smile, her own flight suit marked with Banshee. Major Katerina Kat Volkov, the finest pilot he had ever known, and the one whose death had driven him from the cockpit forever. The fluorescent bulb overhead flickered, casting dancing shadows across the photograph. 3 years since that night in Syria when everything went wrong. 3 years since he watched Kat's aircraft spiral into the desert, her radio calls growing fainter until they dissolved into static. The official report blamed mechanical failure, but Ghost knew better. He knew the mission planners had ignored intelligence about upgraded surface-to-air missiles. He knew the insertion route had been compromised. He knew that if anyone had listened to his warnings, Kat would still be alive. The sounds of base life filtered through the thin walls, boots on concrete, radio chatter, the distant whine of jet engines spooling up on the flight line. Ghost closed the case and returned it to its hiding place, the weight of memory heavier than any physical burden. He had tried to warn them about Syria, just as he wanted to warn them about Operation Nightfall. But who would listen to a janitor? His shift continued with mechanical precision. Empty trash cans in the communications center, where encrypted messages flickered across monitors displaying global operations. Mop the floors in the tactical planning room, where three-dimensional holographic displays showed target buildings in photographic detail. Replace paper towels in the pilot's ready room, where aviators younger than his discarded flight suits traded stories of aerial victories. Each location offered fragments of intelligence, pieces of a puzzle that his trained mind automatically assembled into tactical awareness. By noon, the base hummed with increased activity. Operation Nightfall had accelerated its timeline. Intelligence reports suggested the target window was narrowing rapidly. Ghost watched from the shadows as personnel moved with heightened urgency, their conversations tense and clipped. The SEALs who had dismissed him hours earlier now moved through corridors with the focused intensity of predators preparing for the hunt. They carried themselves with the confidence of men who had never failed, never lost a teammate to poor planning or ignored warnings. The flight line buzzed with activity as ground crews prepared aircraft for the mission. Two MH-60M Black Hawks sat on the tarmac, their rotors tied down against the afternoon wind that swept across the Virginia coastline. Technicians crawled over every inch of the helicopters, checking systems and loading equipment with the methodical care that separated elite units from standard military operations. Ghost paused in his cleaning duties to watch through the hangar's massive doors, his eyes automatically assessing the aircraft's readiness status with the expertise of someone who understood that mechanical failure meant death. "Touching, isn't it?" a voice said behind him. Ghost turned to find Sergeant Major Rebecca Tank Harrison observing the same scene, her weathered face creased with concern. Tank was one of the few people on base who treated him with basic human dignity, though she knew nothing of his history. All that precision, all that training, makes you wonder if it's enough. Ghost nodded slowly, his eyes returning to the helicopters. "Sometimes the best laid plans," he began, then caught himself. "Janitors didn't offer tactical opinions to senior non-commissioned officers." "Yeah," Tank said, understanding the unfinished thought. "Sometimes they do." She studied his profile with the attention of someone who had learned to read people under the worst possible circumstances. "You ever serve, Vance?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Ghost felt the weight of his hidden identity pressing against his chest, the urge to reveal himself almost overwhelming. But the memory of Kat's death, of his warnings ignored and his expertise dismissed, kept his mouth closed. "Civilian contractor," he said finally. "Always been." Tank's eyes held his for another moment, searching for something she couldn't quite define. Then she shrugged and walked away, leaving Ghost alone with his thoughts and the growing certainty that Operation Nightfall was heading toward disaster. The afternoon sun slanted through the hangar doors, painting everything in shades of gold that reminded him of other skis, other missions, and the woman whose death had taught him that being right meant nothing if no one would listen. The evening briefing took place in the same room Ghost had cleaned that morning, but now the atmosphere crackled with pre-mission tension. The SEALs sat straighter in their chairs, their casual banter replaced by focused attention on every detail. General Cross stood before an updated tactical display, her pointer tracing insertion routes that had been refined since the morning session. Ghost moved through the space with practiced invisibility, emptying wastebaskets and wiping surfaces, while his ears captured every word of the mission update. "Final intelligence confirms 40-plus hostiles on site," General Cross announced, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "The target is a high-value asset whose extraction is critical to national security. Failure is not an option." The assembled operators nodded with grim understanding. They had heard similar words before other missions, but something in the general's tone suggested this operation carried weight beyond the typical classified assignment. Lieutenant Morrison leaned forward in his chair, his confidence undiminished by the escalating threat assessment. "What's our air support package, ma'am?" His question drew approving nods from his teammates. These were men who understood that superior firepower often meant the difference between mission success and body bags. "Limited," General Cross replied, and Ghost caught the slight hesitation in her voice. "Two F-35s on standby, but the operational area's proximity to civilian populations restricts their engagement parameters. You'll be largely on your own once insertion is complete." The words hung in the briefing room air like a death sentence, though none of the SEALs seemed to grasp their significance. Ghost's mop moved in steady strokes across the floor, but his mind raced through tactical calculations that painted a picture of disaster. Limited air support against a prepared enemy position, restrictive rules of engagement, an extraction window that relied on perfect timing and zero complications. He had seen this scenario before, had watched it play out in the Syrian desert when planners underestimated enemy capabilities and overestimated their own operational flexibility. The mission timeline scrolled across the briefing room's main display. Insertion at 300 hours, infiltration complete by 3:30, target secured by 400, extraction beginning at 4:30. 30-minute windows for operations that typically required hours of preparation. Ghost recognized the ambitious scheduling for what it was, wishful thinking disguised as tactical planning. In his experience, operations that looked perfect on paper rarely survived contact with reality. As the briefing concluded, the SEALs filed out with the swagger of men convinced of their own invincibility. General Cross remained behind, studying the tactical displays with the intensity of someone who understood the weight of command decisions. Ghost continued his cleaning routine, his presence so familiar that the general seemed unaware of his existence. But as he worked, he caught fragments of her whispered phone conversation, words like acceptable losses and strategic necessity that confirmed his worst fears about the mission's true nature. The base settled into its nighttime rhythm as Ghost finished his duties and made his way to the parking lot where his battered pickup truck waited like a faithful dog. The vehicle looked like dozens of others owned by civilian contractors, dented, rust-spotted, utterly forgettable. But beneath its hood lay modifications that would have surprised anyone who bothered to look. A heavily tuned engine, reinforced suspension, and communication equipment hidden behind the dashboard. Old habits died hard, and Ghost had never quite managed to live like a true civilian. His apartment sat 20 minutes from the base, a sparse efficiency unit that reflected the minimalist lifestyle of someone who had learned to carry his life in a flight bag. The walls bore no photographs, no military memorabilia, nothing that might connect the janitor to the pilot he had once been. But the single window faced east, toward the horizon where the sun rose over the Atlantic, and on clear mornings he could sometimes glimpse military aircraft climbing toward the heavens he had once ruled. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by dreams that mixed memory with premonition. He saw Kat's face in the cockpit of her doomed F-22, her voice crackling through his headset with warnings about surface-to-air missiles that command had dismissed as sensor ghosts. He watched the SEALs from the morning briefing, moving through a compound filled with shadows and death, their confidence evaporating as enemy fire converged from unexpected directions. The dreams always ended the same way, with radio calls that faded into static and the terrible silence that followed catastrophic mission failure. Dawn arrived with the persistence of inevitability, painting Ghost's apartment in shades of gray that matched his mood. Today was the day Operation Nightfall would launch, and with it, the potential for a disaster that would cost lives and accomplish nothing. He dressed in his coveralls with mechanical precision, pinned his security badge to his chest, and prepared to spend another day invisible among the warriors who had forgotten how to listen to wisdom. The drive to base took him along familiar roads that wound through Virginia countryside still shrouded in morning mist. Radio chatter from the base filled his cab, routine communications that carried the undertone of heightened activity. The mission was proceeding on schedule, which meant that in 18 hours, young men would be inserting into a tactical situation that their planners had fundamentally misunderstood. Ghost gripped the steering wheel tighter and pressed the accelerator toward the floor. Perhaps today would be different. Perhaps today someone would listen. The base's main gate appeared through the lifting fog, its guards as familiar with Ghost's truck as they were with the sunrise. He flashed his badge and received the cursory wave-through that civilian contractors had come to expect. But as he drove toward the maintenance building where his supplies waited, something felt different about the morning air. Change was coming, whether anyone was ready for it or not. The morning routine began like every other, collecting supplies, checking work orders, mapping out the day's cleaning schedule across a base that never truly slept. But today carried an electric undercurrent of activity that Ghost recognized from countless pre-mission environments. Personnel moved with heightened purpose, their conversations clipped and focused. The mission was 12 hours from launch, and the weight of impending action pressed against every surface like invisible fog. Ghost made his way to the communications center first, his cart wheels squeaking their familiar song against polished floors. The overnight duty officers barely glanced in his direction as he began emptying trash receptacles filled with classified waste. But his trained ear caught fragments of radio intercepts and intelligence updates that painted an increasingly dire picture of the operational environment. Enemy strength estimates had been revised upward. Weather conditions at the target site were deteriorating. The extraction window was narrowing with each passing hour. In the pilot's ready room, aviators prepared for potential support missions with the methodical care of professionals who understood that precision saved lives. Ghost observed their pre-flight rituals while ostensibly cleaning mirrors and restocking paper supplies. These were good pilots, skilled, dedicated, focused on their mission parameters. But they were also constrained by rules of engagement that reflected political considerations rather than tactical realities. When the SEALs needed close air support, these aviators would face the impossible choice between following orders and saving lives. The tactical planning room buzzed with activity as mission coordinators fine-tuned every aspect of Operation Nightfall. Ghost moved through the space like a ghost made manifest, his presence so routine that planners discussed classified details in his hearing, without conscious thought. He learned that the target facility housed more than the high-value asset they intended to extract. Intelligence suggested the presence of advanced weapons systems and enemy personnel who had been preparing for exactly this type of assault. The mission planners knew their intelligence was incomplete, but the political pressure to proceed had overwhelmed tactical caution. Lieutenant Morrison appeared in the doorway, his face bearing the focused intensity of someone hours away from potentially lethal action. "Final equipment check in 30 minutes, he announced to his team. The SEALs responded with nods and professional acknowledgement, but Ghost caught the subtle signs of pre-mission tension, the slightly too quick movements, the unconscious checking and rechecking of equipment, the 1,000-yard stare that came when warriors contemplated their own mortality. Ghost finished his tasks in the planning room and pushed his cart toward the exit, but Morrison's voice stopped him at the threshold. "Hey, Pops," the lieutenant called out, his tone carrying less contempt than usual. "Thanks for keeping the place clean. Matters more than you probably know." The unexpected courtesy caught Ghost off guard, a glimpse of the man beneath the operator, someone who understood that every person on base contributed to mission success in their own way. The afternoon brought accelerated preparations as Operation Nightfall entered its final phase. Ghost maintained his cleaning schedule, but his route took him through areas where he could monitor mission-critical activities without drawing attention. In the armory, SEALs conducted final weapons checks with the ritualistic precision of men who knew their lives depended on mechanical reliability. Their equipment gleamed under fluorescent lights, customized rifles, specialized optics, communications gear that would keep them connected to command throughout the operation. Each piece of kit told a story of evolution through combat, refined by experience and paid for in blood. The flight line presented a scene of controlled chaos as ground crews prepared the Black Hawks for their night mission. Ghost positioned himself near a hangar entrance where he could observe the pre-flight procedures while maintaining his custodial duties. The helicopters sat on the tarmac like sleeping predators, their sensors and defensive systems being tested and retested by technicians who understood that a single malfunction could doom the entire operation. The aircraft looked formidable, but Ghost's experienced eye noted their limitations. insufficient armor against the advanced weapons systems his intelligence gathering had revealed at the target site. General Cross appeared on the flight line, her presence immediately focusing the attention of everyone in sight. She moved between aircraft with the confidence of someone who had spent decades making life-and-death decisions, but Ghost detected subtle signs of stress in her bearing. The weight of command had taught her to project certainty while harboring private doubts, and today those doubts seemed heavier than usual. As she spoke with the pilots, her words carried the crisp authority of military leadership, but her eyes held shadows that spoke of sleepless nights and impossible choices. "Weather update shows deteriorating conditions at the target," she announced to the assembled aircrew. "Visibility dropping, wind speeds increasing. We may have to adjust the timeline." The pilots absorbed this information with professional calm, but Ghost recognized the tactical implications. Poor weather would limit their air support options and complicate the extraction phase. The mission was becoming more dangerous by the hour, yet political momentum made cancellation impossible. Tank Harrison emerged from the operations building, her weathered face grave with responsibility. As senior enlisted advisor, she carried the burden of ensuring that every tactical detail had been considered and every contingency planned for. Ghost watched her approach General Cross with the careful stride of someone bearing unwelcome news. Their conversation was too quiet for him to hear, but their body language suggested that the intelligence picture had grown even darker in the past hour. The sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the base in shades of amber that reminded Ghost of other sunsets on other bases before other missions. Some of those operations had succeeded beyond all expectations. Others had ended in tragedy that haunted him still. As he watched the final preparations for Operation Nightfall, he felt the familiar weight of foreknowledge, the certainty that disaster was approaching with the inevitability of nightfall itself. Evening descended over the base like a curtain falling on the first act of a tragedy. Ghost completed his official duties, but found reasons to linger near the operations center, his custodial cart providing perfect cover for observation. The SEALs had entered their final preparation phase, their casual banter replaced by the focused silence of professionals contemplating mortality. They moved through equipment checks and briefing updates with mechanical precision, but Ghost could see the subtle signs of pre-mission stress in their movements. The unconscious touching of Lucky Charms, the repeated checking of gear already confirmed perfect, the thousand-yard stares that came when warriors looked beyond the immediate tactical situation toward the unknown variables of combat. The communications center hummed with increased activity as intelligence updates flowed in from assets positioned around the target area. Ghost emptied trash cans filled with classified waste while listening to encrypted radio traffic that painted an increasingly ominous picture. Enemy reinforcements had been detected moving toward the target facility. Weather conditions continued deteriorating. The narrow window for extraction was closing faster than anticipated. Every update suggested that the mission parameters were shifting toward the impossible, yet the political pressure to proceed remained absolute. General Cross stood in the center of the operations hub, her authority radiating outward in invisible waves that influenced every decision being made around her. She reviewed final intelligence reports while maintaining the composed demeanor that senior officers learned to project under pressure. But Ghost, trained to read the subtle signs of stress in high-stakes environments, noticed the slight tightening around her eyes and the way her fingers drummed against the table when she thought no one was watching. The weight of command had taught her to make impossible decisions, but that didn't make them any easier to live with. "Final mission brief in 1 hour," Tank Harrison announced to the assembled personnel. Her voice carried the steady authority of someone who had spent decades preparing warriors for combat, but Ghost caught the underlying tension that came when experience suggested that good people were about to die for questionable reasons. The SEALs responded with professional acknowledgement, their training overriding whatever private doubts they might harbor about the mission's viability. Ghost pushed his cart toward the exit, but his mind remained focused on the tactical disaster unfolding before his eyes. The parallels to Syria were unmistakable: incomplete intelligence, overly optimistic timelines, political pressure overriding tactical judgment. He had tried to warn them about Syria, had submitted formal reports questioning the mission parameters and suggesting alternative approaches. His concerns had been dismissed as the overcautious fears of an aging pilot who had lost his edge. 3 days later, Kat was dead, and with her died ghost's faith in military hierarchies that valued rank over experience and politics over lives. The base's corridors echoed with the purposeful footsteps of personnel preparing for night operations. Ghost moved through these familiar spaces like a specter haunting his own past, invisible to the living but intimately connected to their fate. In 6 hours, the Black Hawks would lift off into darkness, carrying brave men toward a mission that his experience told him was fundamentally flawed. The question that haunted him was simple: would he watch another avoidable tragedy unfold, or would he find the courage to act on knowledge that no one wanted to hear?